Introduction. Hey there, take a deep breath, let the day go. You're here now, just you, your thoughts, and a little history to help you unwind. Tonight we're traveling back in time. Back to the forests of West Africa, back to the heart of the Yoruba kingdom's places full of mystery, rhythm, and royalty, but also hard work, long days, quiet rituals, and a world built on things most people never noticed. Over the next couple of hours, I'm going to walk you through 4 very different slices of life in that world. First, we'll look at what it was like to serve in a royal palace not as a warrior or chief, but as someone who worked quietly in the background, sometimes for life. Then we'll meet a King Daba Adeyemi who had to hold on to traditions while everything around him was changing. After that, we'll explore a mystery, a lost shrine where gold and art were buried for centuries. And finally, we'll step into the courts of the elite where kings were more than kings. They were treated like gods. So, close your eyes if you want, or just let your mind wander. We're not in a rush. Let's start from the ground up, where most people lived and worked on the palace floor. Segment 1. Forest sweat and endless service. Imagine waking up before the sun. It's still dark, but already warm. The air is thick like the forest is breathing around you. You step outside barefoot. The ground is cool. There's smoke curling up from kitchen huts, and somewhere nearby someone's pounding yam in a big wooden mortar. You're a palace servant, or maybe a palace slave. Not the kind of life you chose, but the life you live. Every day is a routine. Sweeping the courtyard, fetching water from the sacred stream quietly, carefully, polishing the royal brass so it shines like fire when the light hits it, always watching, always listening, always knowing your place. You don't speak unless you're asked to. You don't go where you're not allowed. You don't look the king in the eyes. Inside the palace, everything moves slowly but precisely. There are layers, holes, courtyards, hidden doors, and behind each one, someone important, someone more powerful than you. Still, you matter. You keep things running. Maybe you carry a tray not with food, but with sacred items, beads, cola, nuts, cloth folded just right. Maybe your job is to dance during rituals only a few steps. Perfectly practiced. Some of the people you work with were born into this. Others were taken during wars, raids, debts passed down. Some are treated with care, some are just forgotten. But inside this world, time moves differently. You learn the rhythm. You hear the drums and know what they mean. You know when to bow, when to speak, when to disappear. And slowly it becomes your world too. The outside world keeps spinning. Farmers out in the fields work under the sun. Mothers sell fish and cloth in the marketplace, calling out their prices in song. Blacksmiths sweat beside fires, shaping tools and weapons. But you stay in the shadows of kings. And it's not glamorous. It's not easy. But it's history and it's real. A world full of people we don't usually talk about. But without them, nothing would have worked. The ones who held the trays. The ones who swept the floors. The ones who stood still while everyone else danced. Segment 2. Daba Adeyemi a king torn between tradition and change. Now imagine the palace from before, but instead of sweeping its floors, you're watching the man who sits at the very center of it all. Daba Adeyemi, not a mythical king, not a statue in bronze, but a real man. Waking up early like the rest, though his bed is softer, his clothes are heavier, and his decisions, they weigh more than gold. In his time, the world was shifting fast. Old gods were still worshipped with chants and drums, but whispers of Christianity and Islam were getting louder. Markets buzzed with cowries and trade, but new coins and foreign merchants were creeping in too. And beyond the trees, the British, watching, mapping, negotiating. Daba Adeyemi didn't have the luxury of standing still. Every day he had to balance. Do I hold on to the sacred traditions of my ancestors, or do I adapt to this strange, expanding world? He wore coral beads and ceremonial robes stitched with meaning. Each fold, each thread, said something about his lineage, his land, his right to rule. But he also hosted foreign guests, diplomats, missionaries, traders with strange clothes and stranger demands. They smiled politely, took notes, offered gifts that looked like weapons, or tools, or both. Sometimes Adeyemi would gather his council-wise old men, some quiet, others full of fire, and they'd argue deep into the night. The priests wanted to protect the shrines, the generals wanted better guns, the traders wanted new routes, and the king, he just wanted to protect his people and his power. Imagine the pressure. Every festival had to be perfect. Every word in public, memorized and rehearsed. One wrong move, and you risk looking weak. Too much tradition and the new world passes you by. Too much change and your people think you've betrayed them. Daba Adeyemi walked that tightrope for years. He still led sacred rituals in the palace courtyard, his face painted in white clay, but he also built roads, opened schools. He let foreign teachers in, but only to a point. He traded with outsiders, but held on to local customs. He was a king not just of land, but of time. One foot in the past, one stepping toward the future. And maybe that's why he stayed in power as long as he did. Not because he was the richest or the most ruthless, but because he understood balance. In the end, he wasn't just remembered for ruling, he was remembered for choosing, for deciding each day what parts of the old world to carry forward and what to let go. The lost temple of Ife, gold heads and forgotten mysteries. Imagine the rainforest is quiet now. Birdsong fades, the drums are silent, and the only sound is your footsteps on warm earth. You're standing where a temple once stood, though no one knows exactly where anymore. Time has swallowed it. The jungle, patient and green, has covered its bones. This was Ife, an ancient Yoruba city, older than empires, soaked in sunlight and sacred stories. But in this moment, it's just you and silence, and the soft idea that something holy once happened here. The temple of Ife, they say, held wonders. Walls carved with symbols that don't translate. Shrines to gods whose names were once powerful but now forgotten. And deep within, buried under layers of time gold. Not coins, not jewelry, but heads, human heads, cast in metal, exquisitely detailed. So real, you might expect them to breathe. These Ife bronze heads, as they're called now, weren't meant for museums. They were sacred, crafted with such precision that even modern sculptors raise their brows. Eyelids soft as real ones, lips parted, hairstyles captured strand by strand. Were they kings, priests, gods? We still don't know. Some say they were funerary masks worn by the dead to remind the living of who they were. Others whisper they were vessels, that the spirit of the ruler was somehow kept alive inside. Silent witnesses to centuries of change. Archaeologists began uncovering them in the 20th century, buried beneath courtyards, tucked under tree roots. Each discovery added more questions. How did a people from so long ago work bronze this well? Why so many heads, but so few bodies? What happened to the temple that housed them? Even now, only fragments remain. A few crumbling walls, a broken pillar, some carved stones that might have once held up the roof. The rest, swallowed by time, or looted, or quietly protected by locals who still consider the land sacred. But every time one of those heads is found, it's like a heartbeat, a soft, steady reminder. We were here, not loud, not with war or empire, but with craft and ritual and care. So tonight, as you drift, picture that hidden shrine, a space once filled with flickering oil lamps, incense in the air, priests chanting softly, and a single golden face, staring quietly into forever. Introduction. Hey there. Tonight, let's leave behind the noise of the modern world for a while. No buzzing phones, no emails, no chaos. Just ... stillness. You're about to drift into a different kind of Viking story. Not the loud, raid-heavy stuff we've all seen 100 times. This time we're not following warriors. We're following the ones who stayed behind. We're going to explore what everyday Viking life was actually like. The quiet, repetitive, sometimes brutally hard parts, but also the small comforts, the strange mysteries, the rituals, the community. First we'll start with farming, the daily grind of survival. Then we'll gently follow an explorer who didn't shout his name through history, but walked a quieter path. After that, a mystery buried under the earth, a ship that might have been more than just a ship. And finally, we'll sit quietly in the back of a mead hall, soaking in the power plays, poetry, and strange prestige of the Viking elite. So take a deep breath, let it out slowly, and let's begin. Segment 1. Why it sucked to farm in the Nordic backlands. Alright, picture this. You wake up in a tiny wooden house. It's still dark. You can see your breath. There's no alarm clock, just the cold creeping in and the sound of animals rustling around inside. Yeah, ... You live with your animals. Not in a cute, cozy, Patona kind of way. More like it's either share this room with the goat or freeze kind of way. You pull on scratchy wool clothes. Nothing's clean, nothing's dry. Your boots are made of stiff hide, and they never quite keep the wet out. Outside, it's gray and muddy, and it will be for a while. You're a Viking farmer, not a raider. Not a legend, just someone trying to grow enough barley to make it through the winter. And let me tell you, the land does not make it easy. The soil is rocky. The seasons are short. You plant your crop with a hand plow, maybe with a neighbor or two. No horses, no iron tools, just grit. Your hands stay rough, your back stays sore. And every season you wonder, is this the one where it all fails? Sometimes it rains for weeks. Other times it doesn't rain at all. If your harvest is weak, you ration your food. You patch old clothes instead of making new ones. You trade what little you have, just hoping to get through. And even when things go well, you don't really get a break, because winter is coming ... Again, always at night you sit near a smoky fire. Maybe someone tells a story on old saga passed down like a warm blanket. Maybe there's stew. Maybe not. The wind howls outside, but inside, there's a strange sense of rhythm. Hard, yes, but familiar. This was the real Viking life for most people. Not swords, not sails, just survival. And somehow, in all of it, a quiet strength. Segment 2. Who was Thorfinn Karlsefni? A quiet explorer story now that we've spent time in the cold mud and barley fields of Viking life. Let's sail quietly away, still under grey skies, but this time with the creak of a wooden ship beneath our feet. Tonight, we meet someone a little different. You've probably never heard of him in school. He wasn't loud. He didn't sack cities. His name was Thorfinn Karlsefni, a man who dreamed not of conquest, but of settling, of building something, of going farther than anyone else. and staying there. Imagine him now, standing at the edge of the sea in Iceland, cloak pulled tight, staring out over waves that disappear into mist. It's around the year 1000. He's heard the stories, wild stories of a place far west of Greenland, a land with forests and berries and animals and rivers, a place called Vinland. Maybe it's real, maybe it isn't, but for Thorfinn, it's worth finding out. So, what does he do? He gets a few ships together, just 3, loads them with people, livestock, tools, and a dream. He's not going to raid. He's going to start a new life. It's not a huge voyage. It's not some grand army. Just around 160 people, including women and children. It kind of feels hopeful, doesn't it? They sail west, stopping in Greenland, then off again into the unknown. And eventually they reach it. The coast of North America, long before Columbus. Thorfinn gets there. They find a place to camp. It's not perfect, but it's full of possibilities. They call it Vinland for a while. Things go okay. There's fresh food, there's timber. The air feels a little warmer, but it doesn't last. They meet the locals, indigenous people who trade with them at first, but tensions build. Misunderstandings grow. Then something goes wrong. A fight breaks out. People are hurt. And Thorfinn, who didn't come for war, has to decide what to do. He looks around at the small group, at the children, at the families, and he decides. It's not worth it. They pack up. They sail back all that way, only to leave. But you know, it's interesting. Thorfinn doesn't return defeated. He goes home, back to Iceland, starts a family, tells the story. And that quiet little trip, one of the first European landings in North America, just sort of drifts through time. No battles, no glory. Just a man who tried to build something far away from home. A man with a calm, steady kind of courage. Segment 3, the Gokstad Ship Mystery. Tomb or symbol. Now imagine you're walking along the low hills of southern Norway. It's quiet, the wind rolls over the grass like a soft tide, and there's a faint scent of damp earth and pine in the air. You stop near a gentle rise in the ground, a mound that doesn't look like much, but beneath your feet, hidden for over 1,000 years, is a ship. Not a wreck, not driftwood, not forgotten planks. A full Viking ship, intact, buried, preserved in clay and mystery. This is the Gokstad ship. Discovered in 1880, it had been resting silently under that mound since the 9th century. Like something placed gently into the earth, not lost to it. And what makes it so incredible isn't just its condition, though. The craftsmanship is breathtaking. Even now, it's what was inside. The ship was a burial, a final voyage for someone important. Inside were the remains of a man. He was laid to rest in a small wooden chamber, surrounded by objects. But there were no weapons, no coins, not much gold. Instead, there were beds, chests, kitchen tools, sleds, even a gaming board, things from daily life, and 12 horses, 8 dogs, 2 peacocks. Peacocks, in 9th century Norway. They weren't just pretty birds. They were a message, exotic, rare and symbolic, a kind of status symbol, or maybe a whisper of something spiritual. So who was this man? We still don't know for sure. He was older, around 40 to 50 when he died. Tall, strong, maybe even a warrior once, but not buried like one. Was he a king, a chieftain, a merchant with deep connections? The ship doesn't answer directly. It just lies there, silent, carrying a life story no one can fully read. What's beautiful and strange is how this burial wasn't flashy. There were no runestones with dramatic carvings, no grand declarations, just a ship, sleeping in the earth, a quiet exit. Some believe the Gokstad burial was more than a grave. It was a symbol, a way of saying, this person mattered, not because he ruled, but because he lived well. There's something comforting in that, don't you think? Even in death, there's a sense of gentle routine. The sleds for winter, the chests for travel, the animals waiting patiently for one last journey, and all of it placed inside a ship, as if death itself was just another voyage, one more crossing, a return home. Segment 4, Feasts in the Mead Hall. Power, poetry, and prestige. The wind outside howls through the thatched roofs. Snowdrifts pile along the longhouse walls, but inside it's warm. The kind of warmth that smells like smoked meat, sweet ale, and damp wool drying by the hearth. This is the mead hall, not a palace, not a pub, but the beating heart of a Viking community. Imagine the glow of torches flickering along wooden walls, long tables made from rough timber stretched down either side, and in the middle the fire pit crackles, low and steady. Shadows dance across weathered faces, boots stomp, laughter swells, the air hums with life. It's not a feast every night. Most days are harsh and hungry, but when there's meat to spare after a hunt, a raid, or a harvest, this is where it's shared. Everyone has a place. The chieftain at the high seat, often beneath carved animal heads or a hanging shield. The warriors beside him. The women managing the flow of food and drink, sometimes with more authority than anyone. And the skald, the poet, his voice echoing through the smoke, because in Viking society, poetry was power. A warrior might swing a sword, but a skald shaped his legend. Stories were currency. And in a world without written records, a good poem was history. The mead would flow, honey wine, brewed in small batches. Sweet, cloudy, and strong. It warmed the body and loosened the tongue. A roasted boar turned slowly over the fire, Thick barley bread is passed hand to hand. Someone strums a lyre, another begins to recite. He sailed across seas dark as raven's wings, and returned with silver, soaked in salt and glory. It's not just entertainment, it's hierarchy. To be spoken of in the mead hall was a mark of honor. To be forgotten was a second death. And these feasts, they were more than food. They were negotiation, celebration, announcement, and mourning all in one. It was here that alliances were formed, marriages proposed, raids planned, grudges settled, and sometimes, quietly, enemies made. The mead hall didn't just echo with laughter. It held secrets, whispers traded under breath, a sideways glance that meant more than 1,000 shouted words. But for a moment, on a feast night, none of that mattered. The fire was warm, the stew was thick, and the outside world, cold, chaotic, brutal, was kept at bay, if only for a few hours. Somewhere in the corner a child dozed off against their mother's cloak. The scold's voice drifted into a softer rhythm, and the room slowed, a rare moment of peace. A flickering window into a life that was hard, but not joyless, rough, but full of rhythm. Why you wouldn't last a day in a colonial Indian outpost and more theme. The sweaty struggle of colonial trade posts versus palace intrigue and hidden rituals. Why it sucked to be a clerk at a company fort. Imagine yourself waking up in a windowless room, its walls damp and peeling from last night's rain. You're in Fort St. George, Madras, or perhaps Fort William, Calcutta. It hardly matters. They all feel the same after a while, moldy and sun-bleached. You are a junior writer, barely 20, not a writer of poems, but of account books, one of hundreds of company men shipped in from England to sit behind a desk wearing a wool coat in 40-degree heat, sweating, always sweating. The day begins early, not out of discipline but necessity. By noon, the heat turns the air into syrup, and pens stick to your fingers. You're expected to rise before sunrise. Tea is weak, bread is stale, and breakfast might be rice or lentil sif. The cook hasn't fled during the night. You're dressed in starched cotton that chafes your skin, pulling on stockings despite the mosquitoes buzzing endlessly near your calves. No boots today. They're still drying from last week's storm. Your job, to transcribe records by hand, ship manifests, trade invoices, reports of theft, accounts of pepper sacks gone missing, or opium weights that somehow don't add up. But you don't just write, you wait. You wait for permission. For sealed instructions from London that take 6 months to arrive. For orders from above that contradict one another. For a nod from the senior officer who rarely leaves his quarters. Time is molasses. The fort smells of musty gunpowder, overripe mangoes, and rotting wood. Outside your office, native porters haul crates under the sun. Inside, ceiling fans creak slowly, powered by ropes and tired arms. The soldiers laugh behind your back. They think you're soft, but they don't understand. You face your own battles, malaria, heat stroke, snakes coiled in your boots, and boredom. So much boredom, evening brings no peace. You write by flickering oil lamps, your ink smudging across cheap company paper. Sometimes, when the fort falls quiet, you hear drums from a distant village, not threatening, just rhythmic. You wonder what it means, you wonder what they're dancing for, but you're not allowed to leave the gates. You were told you came here to bring order, but it's hard to feel like the ruler of anything when your dinner is moldy cheese and biscuits swarming with weevils. Still, you persist, one ledger at a time, a cog in a grand machine, a machine that doesn't quite understand the land it's turning in. The rise and fall of Robert Clive. Not as heroic as they say. Let the candle burn low. Settle deeper into your pillow, and picture this. A young man, awkward, anxious, and deeply bored, is sent to India by the British East India Company, not as a soldier, not as a leader, but as a clerk, just like the one we met earlier. Robert Clive's story doesn't begin in glory, it begins in paper. He hated it. Like many before him, Clive wilted in the heat of Madras. He battled depression, illness, and long stretches of nothingness. His colleagues found him strange, brooding, and impulsive. But what made Clive different was that, unlike others who kept their heads down, Clive reached for a sword. When the Carnatic Wars flared up between French and British factions, Clive joined the militia, not out of duty, they say, but perhaps out of restlessness. And strangely, war suited him. Not by discipline, he was no polished officer, but by sheer nerve. He led small bands through swamps and jungles, outnumbered, undersupplied, but driven. One foggy morning in 1751, during the siege of Artsode, Clive held a crumbling fort with just a few hundred men against thousands. The cannons fell silent. The enemy retreated, and back in London, the papers began whispering Clive of India. But let's not mistake bravery for brilliance. Clive wasn't a military genius. He was a gambler, a man who bet big, and won until he didn't. In 1757, at the now famous Battle of Plassey, Clive faced the Nawab of Bengal. Officially, it was a battlefield. In reality, it was more a business meeting. Clive bribed Mir Jafar, the Nawab's commander. The battle was over before it began. It wasn't valor, it was leverage. And the reward? Clive became rich, unbelievably rich. He was granted titles, lands, and what some called a king's ransom. Back in Britain, Parliament grew suspicious. How did a former clerk now own mansions, seats of power, and private armies? Clive insisted it was all a gift from grateful allies. But even he began to question what he'd become. By the 1770s, India was groaning under the weight of company rule. Famine swept through Bengal, partly fueled by company hoarding and speculation. Clive returned to London a hero, but was soon dragged into scandal. He testified in front of Parliament, his voice weary, his gaze distant. "I stand astonished at my own moderation," he said once, defending how little he'd actually taken. He died not long after. Not in battle, not in exile, but quietly, from a self-inflicted wound. His name remains carved into plaques and schools, but history has slowly softened its tone. Not a savior, not quite a villain, more a symbol of ambition, unchecked. An empire unmoored. The mystery of lost fort libraries beneath the dust. Close your eyes for a moment, and imagine the inside of a crumbling colonial fort in southern India. Not the outer walls, scarred by time and cannon. Not the gates, rusted and warped from monsoon after monsoon, but deep inside, a quieter place. A narrow hallway, a wooden door, a library. Yes, even higher among the heat and insects, noise and conquests there were books, stacks of them, ledgers, treatises, maps drawn in careful spidery ink. This is the forgotten part of company forts, not just soldiers and rifles but record keepers and thinkers, scholars in uniform, scribes under lantern light. Many of these forts, like Fort St. George in Madras or Fort William in Calcutta, had rooms filled with texts, languages, taxes, trade agreements, ship logs, weather patterns, botanical drawings, all meticulously recorded, and yet so few of these documents survive. Why? Some were lost to fire, many more to neglect. Mold crept in, termites feasted, floods turned ink into watercolor smudges, but others simply disappeared. During the transfer of power from company to crown, many rooms were sealed, and the records inside, deemed irrelevant or sensitive, vanished. Some believe whole libraries were intentionally buried or burned to hide shady deals or erase inconvenient truths. Whispers of contracts made in secret, or maps revealing too much. There's even talk, though never proven, of a private collection hidden beneath Fort William, sealed in haste during a riot, a treasure trove of translations, local histories, and stolen manuscripts. The company didn't just collect spice and silver, it collected knowledge, sometimes to preserve, sometimes to control, and local scholars they noticed. Bengali poets lamented lost texts, Tamil intellectuals searched for erased chronicles. Whole traditions of knowledge that once pulsed in temple libraries, now only referenced in memory. One sad irony, while the company saw native texts as primitive or irrelevant, it also feared their power. So sometimes they locked them away, other times they translated them poorly, turning living wisdom into lifeless footnotes. Today researchers stumble across fragments, in dusty archives, in mislabeled boxes, in letters home from young officers who scribbled, "Found the strangest book today, no one here can read it." Imagine that. A book someone spent years crafting, reduced to a curiosity, and then lost. The wind moves through those old forts now. Empty corridors echo with nothing but dust. But somewhere, maybe in a sealed storeroom or sunken basement, a forgotten library still sleeps, waiting. Life in the Nawab's court. Silk, ceremony, and shadows. Imagine this. You're waking up not in a wooden barrack, but on a silk mattress. The air smells faintly of rosewater and sandalwood. Somewhere outside, a tampura hums its low, dreamy notes. You're in the court of a Nawab, a local ruler under the loose and often uneasy thumb of the British East India Company. And though your room is calm, just beyond the curtain, the world is anything but. These courts were spectacles. Architectural wonders with domed ceilings and mirrored halls, gardens bursting with jasmine, fountains murmuring all day and night. But underneath the surface beauty, complicated dance unfolded, not just of poetry and music, though there was plenty of that, but of alliances, betrayals, diplomacy, and delay. Every gesture mattered, the way a turban was tied, how many rings adorned a hand, which language was spoken first, Persian or English. You might hear laughter at a poetry recital, and then silence, cold and sharp, when the company's envoy walked in, because the Nawab, though treated with ceremonial respect, was more of a chess piece than a king. Imagine sitting in the hall of audience, the Nawab on a low throne, a translator whispering into his ear, company men watching everything, writing quiet notes in the corner. There were still elaborate feasts, of course, scented rice, stewed meats, and silver trays of sweetmeats. Court musicians played ragas timed to the seasons. Dancers moved in slow, storytelling gestures, but the mood, always aware, always slightly tense. Who could be trusted? Even inside the zenana, the women's quarters, stories were traded. Nobles' wives, British officers, mistresses, court dancers with secret influence. Everyone knew something, and no one said everything. And what about the Nawab himself? A lonely figure, really, trapped between tradition and pressure, honor and debt, ritual and reality. The company often controlled the purse strings. If he displeased them, payments stopped. If he was too independent, rumors might swirl, or worse, another heir might suddenly become more favorable. So he hosted banquets, built mosques, composed verses, and quietly maneuvered. Meanwhile, British officials reported back home, decadent, inefficient, oriental pomp, missing entirely the delicate threads holding this strange coexistence together. But you're just here, lying quietly in the background. Maybe a servant boy refilling a hookah, maybe a junior clerk summoned to translate a Persian line. You see the soft power at play. How silence says more than shouting, how a single glance from a veiled woman can shift an entire evening's plans. And when the party ends and the marble halls grow quiet, you hear it again, the tempura's note, steady as breath, a low hum echoing centuries of beauty, fear, pride, and adaptation. With that, the lights in the palace dim, the curtains sway softly in the breeze, and your place in history, small, quiet, unnoticed, feels strangely real. If you're still awake, just breathe easy. The world is far away now, and you're safe in the space between past and dream.